Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the ADBI annual conference. We will start our fourth session, which will be our final session for today. I'm very happy to welcome Dennis Snower, who is the president of the Global Solutions Initiative in Berlin, as our fourth speaker. He is also affiliated with Oxford University, University College London, and Brookings. Dennis is an expert on labor economics, psychosocial economics, digital governance, public policy, and inflation and employment trade-offs. He has made seminal contributions to the design of active labor market policies, published extensively on employment policy, design of welfare systems, monetary and fiscal policy, and the role of motivation systems in economic decision-making. So Dennis will present for half an hour. And after that, the first discussant for his presentation will be Dr. Nisha Arunatilake, who is a research fellow and director of research at the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka and a research fellow of the Partnership for Economic Policy. And the second discussant is Professor Youjin Hahn from Yonsei University, where she also serves as the director of Yonsei Economic Research Institute. Her research focuses on health and education topics in both developed and developing countries. So to get right to the heart of the matter, I would like to hand over to Dennis to present for 30 minutes. Please, Dennis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Without further ado, it's a great honor to be here. And without further ado, I'm going to share my screen, which is about the dark side of escaping the middle income trap. The paper deals with something, and this is done together with my brilliant colleague, Fernanda Ortega, who will be participating in the question and answer period. The question here is a really important one. Middle-income countries around the world wish to do nothing more in general than to escape the middle-income trap. And this paper calls this single-minded pursuit of escaping the middle-income trap into question. Because what countries should be doing, I think everyone will agree, is to promote human flourishing. And human flourishing encompasses much more than simply the consumption of goods and services and the things measured by GDP. And what we have done is looked at the Asian countries that have successfully escaped the middle-income trap and asked whether they have managed to escape the other traps that are concerned with social and environmental matters. Now, one idea that policymakers have in the back of their mind when they single-mindedly go for escaping the middle-income trap is that they see economic prosperity as the great enabler of human flourishing, that if you have enough resources at your command, then you can do everything else that you want. That is called into question if we find that economic prosperity in terms of GDP per capita becomes decoupled from social and environmental prosperity. And that is indeed what our data shows, so that we then fall into a variety of other traps, a social fragmentation trap, disempowerment trap, and environmental degradation trap. And this is important. It's important both for the countries that have escaped, the countries that I'll be talking about here, as well as the countries who aspire to escape from the middle-income trap. So we look at 4 drivers of human flourishing, and we consider them to be central to the success of human beings on this planet, as well as our success in leading a meaningful and fulfilling life. The first is solidarity, which basically is our sense of embeddedness in society, the degree to which we are able to approach our collective challenges through collective action, our solidarity within our social groups. The second is our sense of agency, our ability to shape our lives through our own efforts. The third is gain, which is GDP per capita. And the fourth is environmental stewardship, which is the responsible use, protection, and regeneration of the natural environment, so that we live in harmony with the natural world. And we have used an interesting, an important data set, the Gallup data set, to measure this for nearly 2 decades for the countries in question. For solidarity, we measure inward solidarity, where that's measured in terms of our access to friends and family in times of need. And outward solidarity means our willingness to give money and time to volunteer for charitable purposes, to receive respect, be tolerant of minorities and immigrants, and so on. Then there are measures of agency concerning freedom of life choice, access to affordable schooling and healthcare, affordable housing, access to roads and transport system, confidence in government and judicial system, absence of corruption, and so on. Environmental stewardship is measured by a host of environmental indices, fresh water withdrawal, wastewater treatment, nitrogen management, renewable energy, waste. I think you get the general idea. Lots of questions asked in the Gallup World Poll. And the interesting thing about this particular data set is that we can measure these things consistently through time and across countries. And that's what makes it, I think, a valuable data set. And of course, this dashboard, Solidarity, Agency, Gain, and Environment, which can be summarized by the word SAGE, S-A-G-E, also can be seen as a dashboard that helps to integrate many other measures of well-being that exist in the world. So here's the data for Japan, Singapore, and South Korea. And if you look at these time series from 2010 to 2023, the blue line is GDP per capita. Solidarity is red, agency is purple, and environment is green. You can see that these time series don't really move together in any sort of easily recognizable sense. And so it's useful to look at correlations. And according to the conventional economic paradigm, solidarity, agency, gain, and environmental stewardship, these are all normal goods. So if you have more income, you should be able to purchase more solidarity, agency, and environmental sustainability. And then you would have these time series moving together, but they don't. And so the question is, well, what are the short-run correlations? We find for Japan, there's a strongly negative, significant relationship between GDP per capita and agency. So in concurrent terms, when GDP per capita is high, then agency tends to be low. And there's also a strongly negative, significant relationship between GDP per capita and environmental stewardship. So more GDP per capita hurts the environment, but no significant relationship between GDP per capita and solidarity. Now, if you turn to Singapore, you've got a completely different situation. Strong positive relationship between gain and solidarity, but no significant relationship between gain and agency and environmental stewardship. With regard to South Korea, again different, strongly negative relationship with between gain and environmental stewardship, but no significant relationship between solidarity and agency. And so these varying correlations can be summarized in this table, where you see for Japan, strongly negative relationship between GDP per capita and agency and environmental stewardship. Singapore, positive relationship between GDP per capita and solidarity. And South Korea, negative relationship between GDP per capita and environmental stewardship. So, what is it that's the problem here? How has this happened? Clearly, this common interpretation that solidarity, agency, environmental stewardship, along with GDP per capita, all normal goods, somehow doesn't work. And the answer is very simple. Solidarity is not a commodity, it's not a good, but it's a nexus of relationships. It is how we place ourselves within our society, within our communities. And so it's not possible to supply goods and services and in return demand solidarity. There are no technologies that enable you to transform from one to the other. Agency is similar. It's the ability to change your life. And that it involves some things that can be purchased with income, like education and training, but much of it depends on our networks and institutions in which one is embedded. And again, these are relationships. Environmental stewardship is much more than ecosystem services. It's our relation to the environment, and that relationship bears no straightforward connection. Now let's have a look at long-term considerations. And there, I look at these time series, not in terms of countries, but in terms of the 4 elements of the SAGE index. And if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you see that in terms of GDP per capita, Singapore is up on top, followed by Japan, followed by South Korea. And then if you look at the solidarity and agency diagrams, you see exactly the same ranking. Singapore is up on top, followed by Japan and South Korea. And it's only when you get to the environment diagram at the bottom left hand that you see that this is not the order that's followed. You have Japan at the top, followed by South Korea, and followed by Singapore. So in terms of scatter plots, you can see very clearly these rankings between countries. Singapore up on top in terms of correlations between solidarity and GDP per capita, and scatter plots between agency versus GDP per capita. And there, the countries line up in a predictable way, whereas in the bottom diagram environments, they do not. So the question is, what is really going on here? You have very clear country rankings in terms of solidarity, agency, and GDP per capita. But if you look in the short term, there are no correlations. So what accounts for the positive relations between GDP per capita and solidarity and GDP per capita and agency in the pooled time series cross-section data? And the answer to that question is that we have very strong reasons to believe that solidarity affects material gain. So societies with high social capital, they have better economic outcomes. There's more cooperation, lower transactions costs, more effective collective action, and a lot of economic goals can only be achieved through collective action. Solidarity is also conducive to entrepreneurship. It enhances trust. It facilitates innovation. In the political domain, it reduces conflict. It fosters stability, promotes inclusive growth. So there are many reasons why solidarity should be good for GDP per capita, and also why agency should be good for GDP per capita. Obviously, more personal agency means you've got more skills for innovation, for overall economic growth. Marginalized groups can participate, and so poverty is reduced and their productivity is increased. You've got more community engagement that fosters economic growth through networks of cooperation, improved institutional performance. Once individuals are empowered through strong institutions, they have better economic outcomes because they've got better access to justice and legal rights. Their educational attainment is promoted through agency. And there is anecdotal evidence that agency leads to co-movement in economic prosperity as well. But on the other hand, there's no clear-cut evidence that material gain, what we measure by GDP per capita, leads to more solidarity and agency, that is, in the other direction, which is what the standard economic paradigm is focused on. I mean, on the one hand, it's ambiguous. On the one hand, higher levels of income and wealth can give people the means to invest in better relationships, volunteer activities, and so on. So they may have the leisure to do that. It may also provide more resources for social safety nets and public goods and welfare programs that might promote solidarity and agency. On the other hand, however, skill-biased technological change creates income disparities, and it also divides societies in privileged and unprivileged. And that reduces solidarity and agency. Automation and AI can replace jobs, particularly routine and predictable jobs, and that reduces agency of individuals. Strips them of independence, reduces their bargaining power in the gig economy, for example, and it makes jobs less meaningful. So these things pull in opposite direction, and skill-biased technological change showed itself strongly in these countries in the early 80s and 90s. So it is within our sample period. And so therefore, we find that the escape from the middle income trap is commonly associated with a social fragmentation trap, that moving into the high income bracket is often associated in these countries with high anxiety, social isolation of people who are working very hard. For those, a division into a high income and a low income precarious sector. And in this low income sector, there is job insecurity, whereas in the high income sector, there's often little time for family, weakened values for community and family. So a social fragmentation trap opens up. There's also a disempowerment trap. And the disempowerment often comes through overwork. And then the move to urban centers means high costs of housing, education, childcare. The elderly feel lonely and isolated. And in the non-regular jobs in the lower end of the labor market segmentation, you've got disempowerment because people feel at the mercy of the market. And of course, you've got an environmental degradation trap, which is well recognized, that the escape from the middle income trap often involves resource-intensive industries, lots of fossil fuel consumption, large-scale infrastructure that generated pollution, contaminated waters, reduced by biodiversity, created waste, and increased carbon emissions, and so on. So these are traps that are relevant for human flourishing, but they're not taken into account, obviously, if you just look at the economic side. The policies that are responsible for escaping the middle income trap often caused these other traps, the trap in terms of fragmentation and disempowerment and environmental degradation. Industrialization contributed to inequality and social stratification, often came at the expense of environmental standards. As I said, investment in education created mental health pressures and often came at the expense of vocational training and support for the lower skilled sectors that fostered social divisions. Infrastructure investment often ignored environmental and social costs. It also disrupted communities and displaced populations, and rural areas were often underserved. And trade liberalization and export-oriented growth also created job insecurity because now you were exposed to volatile global markets. In South Korea and Japan, increased competition led to precarious employment and weakened labor rights that contributed to insecurity and reduced agency. Export-led economies shifted the focus from traditional community-oriented work to individual performance-based systems. So you get the idea that the policies that were used to escape from the middle income trap had often deleterious social and environmental effects. Policies aimed at attracting FDI also contributed in this fragmentation of society, and it also reduced regulations on environment. And research and development investments in all three countries benefited the highly skilled professionals, but lower skilled workers face stagnant wages and limited advancement opportunities, and that reduced their agency and solidarity, as well as creating environmental problems. So the policy implications of this are far-reaching and important, both for the countries that have escaped the middle-income trap as well as the countries that seek to do so. And basically, there are 5 policy conclusions that I name here, and they're all obvious once the symptoms of the problem have been identified. You should encourage inclusive economic growth, which means that you need social policies to run alongside the economic policies that provide support for marginalized groups, social safety nets, access to education and healthcare, progressive taxation, and so on. That's first set of policies that are required. Second is you need community development policies to foster solidarity. And these are policies that will include support for local businesses, cultural preservation, community engagement, and so on, that was often forgotten in the last 30 years in the drive to escape from the middle income trap. So that's the second set of policies. And then the third set concerns participatory governance structures. One needs to involve citizens in the decision-making process. So this the governance that enables you to escape from the middle income trap, it should be transparent and accountable and empower communities to help make the decisions if people are affected by them. Third set of policies concerns investment in education and workforce development programs that foster the skills that you need for the future economy. The future also now with AI, the next stage of the digital revolution, will be quite different from the past. And so you need education and workforce development programs that do not just foster skills in the traditional way of standard upskilling, but promote adaptability and resilience and robustness, so that you have skills that can adjust to changing circumstances. And the last set of policy recommendations is that you clearly need to establish environmental regulations and standards that hold industries accountable. And that will involve also changing policies and governance structures in such a way as to make it difficult, if not impossible, to earn profit by destroying the environment. And one can use tax subsidy schemes, regulations, laws, government procurement programs, a wide variety of instruments that make firms pay for environmental damage, and similarly make them pay for any damage that they do for communities, so that firms become empowered to pursue profits while at the same time regenerating in the environment and promoting community harmony. That is as far as I'd like to go, and I'd like to hand over to my discussants. Thank you very much. I will stop
Great. Thank you
sharing
very
my.
much, Dennis, for the comprehensive presentation, looking at all four aspects of welfare, as it were, at the same time, and making the tension explicit. So the first discussant will be Dr. Nisha Arunatilake. You have 15 minutes. Please go ahead. You're still muted.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel, for inviting me to be a discussant for this very interesting paper. Let me put this on. Okay, can you see?
Yes, we can see.
Can you see? Thank you, Daniel, for this very interesting paper and the presentation. And I completely agree with you, the hypothesis with the hypothesis of the paper, that escaping the middle income trap should not be the primary goal of development. There should be other focus areas, like you very well mentioned. You need to think about solidarity, agency, and environmental improvements along with economic prosperity, so that the development is sustained and everybody is benefited from the development. So you have you tell a very interesting story, and you've spun the story around these three countries that you have chosen, Japan, Singapore, and South Korea, and you look at the correlation of their development or per capita income growth with the implications for social solidarity, personal collective agency, and environmental stewardship. So when I was reading I'm just going to present to you some of the questions that came into my mind when I was reading your paper. So one thing I was thinking about is the selection of these countries. So they have very different development pathways, and they are at, in terms of their per capita GDP, they are at very different levels. For example, Japan became a high-income country in 1960s, where the world was a very different one. We were not technologically so advanced, and the drivers of growth were very different. And Singapore became a high-income country much later in the 1980s. and South Korea even later in 1995. And the world today is quite different to all of, when these different countries graduated to becoming high-income countries. So one question I had is whether the timing and the level of development, whether those things had any influence on the story that you are telling. And also what we can see is the time period that you're looking at from 2010 onwards. Singapore and South Korea grew in terms of GDP per capita, but if you see, Japan's actually declined over that period. So some of the things that you're seeing can be negative. Another question that I had is, okay, you want to focus on these three countries. Yes, I agree. There is, it's interesting to see these three countries. But should you also try to look at other Asian countries and whether you see some, what you describe in terms of solidarity and agency and economic environmental degradation. So, because you're trying to associate GDP per capita growth to deterioration of these things. But in other countries, maybe these deteriorations have happened, but not so much growth. So is it, because you're trying to ascribe that rapid growth to that, maybe it might be interesting to look at those countries as well to tell a more convincing story about these associations that you are making. As I said earlier, these graphs are from your paper. You can see that Japan's GDP per capita is actually going down during this period, and other ones are increasing. So, and also the part of your paper is also looking at the literature, which is describing what happened to social solidarity, agency, and environmental impacts in those countries. But the literature is that's looking at is also from different periods of time. For example, for Japan, the story about environment degradation before 2010, there could have been different reasons for that. So maybe you might want to look at different periods of time separately so that you can also relate to other things, other drivers of environment and degradation and all of the other things that may have also influenced the story that you are telling. So when I look at this paper, I mean, one of the conclusions is that the empirical evidence suggests that three countries escape from middle income on average led to environmental deterioration, loss of agency, and no significant influence of solidarity. When I look at this paper, I actually see something a little bit different. And also, I think in the second revision of your paper, some of the new scatter plots that you have included also show that actually there is a kind of a positive correlation between GDP per capita, solidarity, and agency. And one question I also had is, as I mentioned earlier, this negative relationship that you see for Japan. Is that because of the GDP per capita actually declining, the decline that you see of GDP per capita in Japan from 2010 onwards? So you might want to look at that again and make sure that that is not causing this negative sign. So basically, it's not the agency and environment declining, but it's actually the GDP per capita going down. Another question that I had is you're basing your analysis mainly on this Gallup data, which has certain measures of solidarity, agency, and environment. So I was just did a little analysis because it's very easily done on one world data, just to look at the sensitivity of your findings to other measures of data out there. So I've just looked at the environment one. For example, there is a very comprehensive index developed by Yale University, which starts from 2002 onwards. It started with 20 indicators. Now they include some 58 indicators, the Environmental Performance Index, and also this economic growth and carbon dioxide emissions. The data for that is available from really a long time ago. So if you just look at this, for example, I was just wondering to see how sensitive your findings are to the data that you are using by just doing a small analysis. And as you can see, so according to the paper, the correlation between GDP per capita and environment were negative for Japan and South Korea, but you didn't see any relationship with Singapore. But according to the EPI score, the environment score has improved in all three countries. And also the EPI score, there is a, that website has paper, which has done some analysis on the these correlations. And it says that EPI scores are positively correlated with the countries well up to a point. And each level of development, countries have mixed EPI scores. So some very poor countries score well on EPI. And so wealth is not the only factor. So there are other things like human development, rule of law, regulatory measures, and all of that also influencing the EPI score. So I was just wondering, is it maybe rather than focusing on just growth, you might want to also look at compare and contrast other factors that may have also influenced these indicators like rule of law, human development, and all of that in these three countries and any other countries that you might decide to look at also. And in terms of environment, carbon dioxide emissions, there is this very interesting finding that you might also, I mean, you try to imply this also, that actually GDP per capita could influence improvement in carbon dioxide emissions, because what you find is that a lot of these high income countries now are actually the emission levels are going down, and they are not going hand in hand with economic development, partly because they are adopting these new technologies, which are enabling them to have cleaner environments while developing. So to what extent that this has been the case in the three countries that you are looking at, and so that's something interesting to see. And again, the story is a little different here if you look at these indicators as opposed to the one that you are looking at. So some sensitivity analysis across some different types of indicators might be useful. And the story is the same with social fragmentation trap. The paper argued that the rapid income growth in the three countries has increased the precarious work and creating anxiety and social isolation. But I'm just wondering whether this is unique to the country now. For example, Sri Lanka is still a low-income country, and we also have this problem of precarious work. So it's really not due to the rapid economic growth. But it is the competitive nature and the path chosen by the government for development. So and so it might be worthwhile looking at whether the outside of just GDP per capita and the development policies, there are other factors that might also result in this social fragmentation. And very importantly, also, I think this historical connotation are also very important because, in South Asia, we know that because of their historical background, they are very hard work oriented kind of societies. So to what extent that has to do with the story you're telling? Or is this happening in other countries that are also developing very fast, in maybe outside of Asia, even like Ireland or Chile or these kind of countries? Is that happening there, or is it to do with some of the background that of these the East Asian countries that you are looking at the moment? So just to conclude, I just find it's an interesting narrative that you are trying to say, but to convince the reader that what you say is solid across different contexts and different measures of these E, A, and S, I think you might want to look at what is happening in some other countries and also do some other sensitivity analysis. But yeah, it's a very interesting paper, so I hope these comments were helpful to improve it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Nisha, for your comprehensive comments. Before I move to Youjin, I would like to remind our audience that if you have any questions for Dennis, you can write in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So now, please, Youjin, the floor is yours.
Okay. Do you see my full screen? Well,
yes.
Okay.
You do.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. So my name is Youjin Hahn. I'm from Yonsei University. So I'm very happy to be a discussant of this paper by Franja and Dennis. And then let me first start by saying that my sort of discussion focus rather than so much on the comments, but then I aim to provide some complementary information that I think is relevant to the paper. So the paper, the authors indicate that rapid economic growth in Asian countries, particularly Japan, Singapore, and South Korea, led to significant material well-being improvements. However, there are risks without balanced progress, and then the traditional prescription for just focusing on economic prosperity can be inadequate, and then it can lead to some of the social fragmentation and disempowerment, and then the environmental disruptions. And also these can lead to some political instability, economic fragmentation, and social conflicts. So the authors offer sage approach for more balanced progress. And in this discussion, I want to focus on two particular aspects of these measures for S and A, which stands for solidarity, where solidarity is quote unquote a relationship that connects people into social groups, and it concerns the participation into their social groups such as families, neighborhoods, political groups, and etc. And then the agency is the ability to affect beneficial changes in one's life. So my discussion aimed to provide some detailed examination of these indexes by presenting the evidence on what I think the potential sources of conflicts, which also may contribute to low levels of solidarity and agency, which was particularly evident in South Korea among these three countries. So I want to start with this figure where the authors show the evolution of these 4 indexes across countries. So that here we can see that the ranking is ranking for solidarity and agency is clear, so that the Singapore has the highest level of agency and solidarity, followed by Japan, middle level of agency and solidarity, and South Korea exhibiting the lowest level of solidarity. So let me first talk about the social fragmentation trap. The authors, as the authors argue, the rapid economic growth has resulted in income inequalities, and then this creates some disparities between the rich and poor, and then also some disparities across different educational groups. This can be also influenced by skill-biased technological change that authors discussed. And this has fueled some intense competition among young people into getting more education, and then also probably also driven by some parents wanting to have their kids to get more education. And then this also is associated with the sort of strong attachment with the education, and then the high wage premium, and then also the attachment with the education and having sort of more stable jobs. So I was wondering, how do young children do in these countries, and then what are the maybe potential causes for social fragmentation? So I looked into PISA results, and then according to 2022 results, so first of all, the PISA shows the international comparison of the sort of test scores, and according to PISA 2022 results, Singapore, Japan, and Korea are actually the top 3 countries among the OECD countries in all subjects: reading, math, and science. And then, so I was wondering, what about the fairness in terms of the socioeconomic status? So the next figure shows the relationship between the strength of economic gradients and PISA mathematics performance. So so in this figure, x-axis is the kind of proxy for fairness. It's very hard to see given the small numbers, small letters. But then as you go this direction, the socioeconomic status explains a little of your test score. So there is a greater fairness, and that this is a high mean test score in mathematics. So these Singapore, Japan, and Korea are, as we just saw, is very high achieving in terms of academic achievement. And then in terms of the fairness, I think they could improve more, given that there are so many other countries that have sort of that show greater fairness in increasing the test score. And then also the another sort of pattern emerges in this figure is that there is an inverse relationship between the sort of high achievement and then also the sort of fairness, socioeconomic fairness in test score. So I believe this figure shows that all these 3 countries, they can improve a lot more in terms of the increasing sort of greater the social economic fairness. And next, I brought some survey evidence by Professor Hee-sam Kim at GIST in Korea. And this survey was done in 2017, where he asked the 1,000 students in each of these 4 countries, South Korea, Japan, China, and US. The question asked, which of the following images do you think best represent your high school? And then the students were choose to choose one of the following answer. A cooperative plaza, where it's kind of like the school is like a place where the collaborations are encouraged, and trading market, where school is kind of like market exchange between providers and consumers of educational service, and then the battlefield, a place where fierce competition takes place to achieve high grades and getting into the goal of prestigious university. So this table summarized the result, and then it was actually pretty shocking that for the South Korean students, 80% of the high school students surveyed chose their image of the high school like a battlefield for survival. This is in contrast to Japan, where majority of the students actually chose their school image as the communal, more like a communal plaza. So even though in terms of the evidence from PISA, where these 2 countries sort of were similar in terms of fairness and the high achievement, there are like some differences between these 2 countries in terms of how they view the world and how they perceive the education system. And then the level of pressure and then the competition they may feel is also likely to exist, not just during their sort of school years, but also as they transit into the adulthood. Let me skip this in the interest of time. And then so the next figure shows the next want to talk about this empowerment trap, and the high level of stress and overwork may have undermined the personal empowerment, and then at the same time, fertility rate has decreased very significantly. Could be coupled because of increased demand for long working hours and high education. And despite some improvements, still there has been a significant gender gap in wages and labor force participation. And especially in Korea, then this could lead to disempowerment trap and then gender conflicts, which may also contribute to low fertility rate. And to give you some number, the gender gap among OECD countries in Korea was actually the number 1. It was in Korea, 31%, followed by Latvia, and then actually the third highest gender wage gap was Japan at 21%. Let me skip this graph. And so what may have caused this difference by gender in the labor market can also be seen when we look at the work-life balance index by country, according to the report by Ji-yeon Kim at KDI. And Japan and Korea are actually among the 2 worst countries in terms of having a work-life balance and balance index. And then on the right side figure, it also shows the labor force participation across the life cycle among women in Korea. It shows very distinct M shape. And then this is also kind of evident in Japan as well, to the somewhat lesser extent. So this M shape is typically due to the sort of during the childbirth age, and then the sort of marriage age, many women tend to leave the labor market. And then this, let me move on, given I have about 3 minutes. And so the another sort of distinct pattern in Korea is that the Korean woman has a very high child penalty. So married woman's wage drop significantly upon giving the first childbirth, about 66%. Compared to married man's wage after childbirth. And then this number is much higher than the other country that estimate this child penalty using the similar methodology, where Denmark is about 20% and Sweden 27% and United States 31%. So this figure shows that there is a large decline in the labor force participation among mothers upon the childbirth. And then also this is kind of the key reason for the earnings drop. And then the Korea shows very, as such, a very high child penalty. Which sort of therefore, these unequal division of some of the housework, low life work balance, and then the unequal labor market return for women, especially after childbirth, may make many women not wanting children. And then also, given it's hard to balance work and life, families may want to have fewer children, even if they decide to have a kid. And so this is sort of evidenced by this rapid, vast decline in the fertility rate in South Korea, and then also showing the world's lowest fertility rate, as you can see in this right figure. And because of this low fertility rate, and then also with the increased life expectancy, the population growth is expected to, projected to decline. And then also the country is likely to experience very high old age dependency ratio, so that this could also generate some conflicts between the old and young generations. So I skipped this slide before, but then there were some survey results by Duffy and al. And it was very sort of interesting to see that the Korea was among the top countries that exhibit the highest tension between different groups in society, particularly in the area of gender, and then those with and without university education, and rich and poor, and old and young. And in contrast, Japan is ranked relatively much lower, indicating lower level of tension across different groups in society. And I know my time is up, and this is a conclusion slide. So to conclude, the economic growth, according to the authors, didn't really lead to improvement in social and environmental factors, even though I didn't have, in this discussion, I haven't really focused on environmental factors. And this is important because the low solidarity and then agency impacts society's well-being. And so in terms of policy implication, I believe it's important to foster an environment and education system that could perhaps emphasize a social capital, value of social capital early on in education, maybe, and also rather than focusing solely on sort of making the quantitative target, such as high income, high test scores, but the promoting more greater social understanding, and then also there might be needed for the policy intervention for more balanced progress. That's all I have today, and thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Youjin. It's very interesting to see these empirical data coming from Korea. So now it's time for Q&A, but before we open for Q&A, Maybe Dennis, you have some responses for the comments provided so far. Please unmute.
Yes, I do have some responses. The first is simply these were two superb discussants, and I would be really grateful if both of you could send me your slides and any other comments you may have, because they highlight things that we have not highlighted and contain a richness of insights that we can clearly benefit from. Let me make a few comments generally. The first and perhaps most important one is that over the past 20 years, it has become evident that GDP is not a successful measure of human progress, and therefore one needs something else. And in the OECD, more than half the countries have some form of well-being index and policies that are in some form related to them. But these well-being indices make a minute, if any, impact on the public debate or on public policy, primarily, I believe, because they're not consistent through time and not consistent across countries. And therefore, it is really important to have some data that rises to the challenge that GDP poses, which is this consistency across time and through countries, which is what the paper attempts. And once we have time series in the social domain on solidarity and agency, which I think are the two really critical foci that we should focus our attention on, because solidarity provides a basis whereby we can engage in collective challenges, and many or most human challenges are collective challenges. And cooperation is what distinguishes Homo sapiens from other primates, that were able to cooperate in very large numbers relative to great apes and so on, without having genetic affinity. And the second is agency, which is absolutely critical for innovation, which is also something that distinguishes human beings. So these two are really important, and we want to live in a sustainable environment, and so some measures of environmental sustainability are important. Now, once we have that on the table, then out come a slew of questions and misgivings and so on. And it engages a debate that we have not had before that is truly valuable. And the two discussants are witness to what a debate can be generated thereby. And therefore, I think this in itself is important and useful, and therefore simply accumulating data that is consistent across time and across countries should be a really important normative aim that we have. And other measures that we have, such as the one that you, among others, Nisha, have mentioned, the EPI, is not annual, for example. A World Value Survey, not annual, and that makes it difficult to rise to this GDP challenge. Okay, now the second general comment that I'd like to make, which again is a comment that underlay your comments, Nisha, which is, what's the counterfactual? How do we know that it was the escape from the middle income trap that caused these social fragmentation traps. And that's what you meant when you say you should look at other countries, and some countries didn't escape the middle income trap, but they still had these problems and so on. And that is indeed useful on looking at counterfactuals. Now, country comparisons can only take you so far in looking at counterfactuals. And for a particular country, you'd need sophisticated econometric studies to give us better insights into what the counterfactuals may be. And so all that we have currently is some suggestive stories, which is basically what the paper provides. That if you want to escape the middle income trap, you clearly need to work really hard. And if you work really hard, then it may come at the cost of family. And as you, Youjin, said, the education may become a battlefield, and that poses problems, and we should be sensitive to these problems. And we won't be sensitive to these problems unless we have the appropriate measures. Now, you have both suggested other appropriate measures, which are only to be welcomed. There's one thing that I'd like to just put to one side, which is how you define middle income is really important. According to our definition, Malaysia and Thailand are not high-income countries, according to our definition, but according to other definitions, perhaps yours, Nisha, they are. And so that's just something to be taken into account. And the fact that the timing is very different in the escape from the middle income trap, and therefore the determinants of the relevant determinants of solidarity and agency may differ because history doesn't repeat itself. It advances, is a really important issue. Now, obviously, the Gallup data is consistent across these countries, but only for this time period. We can't go back to the 1960s, unfortunately, and therefore that clearly limits us. But it is very useful to emphasize the fact that these countries that we have identified escaped the middle income trap at different times, and at these different times, you had different technologies, different sensitivities. In the 1960s, it was not clear that we were living in the Anthropocene, for example. And this is clearly important. Now, the other thing that is important is that there are many different ways of measuring environmental performance. And so the EPI takes a different route towards measuring them. CO2 emissions is available in our world in data, but clearly isn't a very comprehensive measure of environmental performance. And we should look at many different measures, which will tell us very different stories. The other interesting thing that Youjin mentioned is fairness. Now, fairness is an aspect of both solidarity and agency, and perhaps we should, have considered it separately as an issue. Certainly, inequality of opportunity is often associated with fairness, and we associate that a lot with decline in agency, at least in the distribution of agency across the population. And that leads me to my last point, which is just like GDP per capita does not tell you very much about a country. And even if you're focused on GDP per capita, you should look at distribution of GDP per capita. And that tells you much more, because it may hide a lot of tensions. Similarly, distributions of solidarity and agency are really important. And my brilliant co-author, Fernanda Ortega, and I have written a paper on distributions, and we find that for the countries we've looked at, which were the G20 countries, those who are in the lowest decile of the income distribution tend also to be in the lowest decile of the solidarity and agency distributions. And that has very far-reaching implications, obviously, for policy. And therefore, all I can say is, I welcome all these other approaches to solidarity and agency. The gender gap, how schools are examined in terms of cooperative plaza, trading market, the battlefield. I think that these are really important ways forward. The things that you mentioned, terms of you, Nisha, said Sri Lanka is still a middle-income country, still does have precarious work. How do we know that had it escaped the middle-income trap, it would have had more precarious work? It's just not clear. But one thing is clear, which is that given the anecdotal and other suggestive evidence that we have, that the single-minded pursuit of escaping the middle-income trap brings pressures with it. And these pressures need to be kept into account when countries plan their path into the future. And especially now with the advent of AI, the political, geopolitical disruptions that we have, we are in for a world of great change and uncertainty, radical uncertainty. And this can only be dealt with effectively, I think, through a good combination of solidarity and agency. GDP per capita alone won't enable us to adjust to this rapidly changing world. And consequently, continuing work on gathering data on solidarity and agency along with GDP per capita could be a very useful way forward. And as I say, I would love to have the slides of my two wonderful discussants and like to be in a conversation with you to carry this work forward. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Dennis, for your response. We have one question from Dean Sonobe, and I think that will be the last one because we are running out of time. Dean Sonobe, please.
Yeah. So
please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dennis and Nisha and Youjin. So I wrote when I gave my comment to Dennis. I wrote that yeah. So solidarity will definitely have a positive effect on the G gain. But now I have another idea because the data that Youjin kindly showed suggests that Japan has a very high level of solidarity, right? So, and then about economic growth, so Nisha mentioned several times that Japanese economic growth is so stagnant. The growth rate is very low. So maybe the S can cause the G negatively. So I have one observation because in at least in Tokyo, so young people are so kind to elderly persons, including myself. So, for example, the door of elevator of this building closes very, very slowly. So the speed of the closing door is adjusted to the convenience for the elderly person. And then there are lots of young people working in this building as well, but they don't complain. And then almost all the buildings have very slow, elevator doors. So whenever I go to China or other, relatively young country, I feel the huge difference. And sometimes young people pushed from behind. So Japan, I never experienced that kind of thing. So, and also Japanese people these days for the last 20 years or so, almost determined to work until the 100 years old. So they work slowly. Even young people work slowly. So naturally, GDP it becomes lower and lower, but people are satisfied. So as Dennis emphasized, so GDP per capita doesn't matter much to Japanese people. So S can cause G negatively as long as G is measured in terms of GDP per capita. Thank you very much.
Could I just say one thing, although time is
Yes.
very short? This is a really important exchange, and I'm extremely grateful to Tsushi for mentioning both these insights, because they lead me to a conjecture that there may be some inverted Kuznets curve with regard to solidarity. When you have low GDP and solidarity rises, then that's helpful to GDP for all the reasons that I've noted. But when you have a very advanced high-income country, then there may be a trade-off between solidarity and GDP, because, among other things, there's a time budget. If you devote all your time to producing goods and services, there's much less time left over for helping elderly people into elevators and so forth. And this may be a feature of economic advance. It's something to be tested, and I will look into it. I'm very grateful to you for that comment.
Great, thank you. And with that, we have come to the end of the session. I would like to thank again Dennis, Nisha, and Youjin for spending the time with us. And yes, virtual clap is in order. And for the audience, thank you for joining us. We will continue with the second day of the ADBI annual conference tomorrow, starting at 10 a.m. Tokyo time, and we hope to see as many of you there as possible. Thank you very much and have a good evening.